Okay, hi, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. It looks like we have 28 out of 40 registered participants who are on the line now. So I'm going to take my sweet time giving an introduction, and hopefully everybody can join us. So welcome to our webinar, and today it is on Clean Rivers Coalition and their statewide outreach campaign strategy. I hope all of you were able to join okay. My name is Vanessa Green, and I'm the Executive Director of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, and I am welcoming you today on behalf of the Oregon Conservation Partnership. I will serve as the facilitator, and I will keep my eye on questions. I want to let you know that this is a part of a monthly webinar series. We use this forum for training and information exchange for soil and water conservation districts, watershed councils, and land trusts in Oregon, but we welcome anybody to join us. These webinars are offered by support of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and we sincerely thank them for their support. We have 40 people registered for this webinar from a range of organizations. Welcome, and we're really happy to have you. In a minute, I'm going to hand this over to our first presenter, Roy, but first, a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, everybody but the panelists and me are muted by default, but there's a couple of ways for you to interact during the webinar. If you want to ask a question during the presentation, you type it into the question, and I will read that question out loud to the presenter when there's a good moment for them to pause. And at the end of the presentation, you can ask a question by either typing it into the question box as you have been doing, or you can click the little hand icon, and then I will unmute you so that you can ask your question directly. There are 2 handouts that you'll find that you can download as we go, and they will also be posted on the Oregon Conservation Partnership website along with the recording of this webinar. One is a link to the Clean River Coalition survey that you'll hear more about in a second. And the second attachment is their slide deck. Short survey at the end of this webinar, and we really appreciate you taking a moment to give us feedback and suggest future topics so that we can continue bringing valuable information to you through these webinars. And lastly, if you want to receive information on upcoming webinars, please include your name and email address somewhere in the survey, and I will make sure to add you to our email distribution list. This webinar is being recorded, and we will post it early next week on the Oregon Conservation Partnership website along with the slide deck. So feel free to share the link to that presentation with any colleagues who couldn't make it today. And that's it, all the housekeeping. Let's get started. Today's webinar is the Clean River Coalition statewide outreach campaign strategy, and a little bit about our presenters. Roy Iwe is a water resources specialist with Multnomah County Water's Quality Program. He participates in a number of multi-jurisdictional watershed partnerships and also serves as the chair of the Clean Rivers Coalition Steering Committee. Alex Danielson, can you raise your hand, Alex? Is the Restoration and Outreach Project Manager for the Hood River Watershed Group, has been steering committee member for the Clean River Coalition since 2017. She has worked on the environmental field for over 12 years, including stints in agricultural conservation management, environmental social marketing, nonprofit management, and restoration ecology. Kate Peterson, account director for Brink Communications, and her role is to lead overall effort to bring campaigns to life. Somebody's dog is making a guest appearance. Annie Ozels is an account manager for Brink Communications. Her role is to manage the research phases to inform the Clean Rivers Coalition communication plan. Josh Chang and Charles Lee are communication strategists, and their role is to make sure that we get the right messages to the right people at the right time. So with all of that, I will hand the session over to Roy, and thank you all for coming.
All right, thank you, Vanessa, for that introduction, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today as we do our big reveal of our draft campaign playbook for the statewide clean water outreach campaign that we're about to create. Over the past 4 years, we've worked steadily to this point, and we've had several watershed councils and conservation districts provide input in the process. And so I want to thank all those folks that have helped us along the way. If you are seeing this for the first time, we hope that by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to feel like you're kind of part of this collective effort already, and that you might be able to sense kind of the place that you might, or the role, or the way you might participate in this project. Let's see here. The agenda today has 3 main parts. First, I'll do a 5-minute introduction about what the Clean Rivers Coalition is, and then Alex will do an introduction of the pollutant database that she created for the campaign. And then our consultants, Brink Communications, good morning, will share their new campaign playbook with you. And then at the end, I have some good news to share with you. It's a little bit of a secret right now, but I hope you can stay till the end. It's when I do my big reveal for this last little update. And so, let's see here. Oops, here we go. So a little bit about the coalition. Oops, actually, I missed a slide there. Okay, sorry about that. We have a blank slide. The coalition is made up of several municipal jurisdictions that we led with starting about 3 years ago. And the idea of the coalition emerged as like several municipalities came together, and we were working all on stormwater outreach, and mostly independently. There was a lot of duplication of efforts. There was not a lot of consistent messaging. And we thought, if we work together, could we do something that was more effective? And could we do something that was more cost effective? So our steering committee was pulled together. We have 10 people. We have Alex Danielson from the Hood River area down to Francis Young in the Rogue Valley. We have several others that my blank slide was supposed to show, but in the city of Gresham, city of Albany, city of Kaiser, city of Eugene, Salem, and so forth. And basically, we're trying to get some representation of all the different areas here so that we have a good leadership of this effort. The coalition itself, is voluntary, and we invite anyone to kind of participate in it. It is led by several municipalities because we do have a stormwater responsibility, and that kind of is kind of a key driver for this piece. The mission of the coalition, building the bridge between clean water and healthy communities through education and outreach. In this context, the bridge is the collaborative campaign that we're about to create. And one of the ways that we wanted to work together is that we said, let's work across boundaries. Let's share generously. This is something that we hadn't been doing before. We also wanted to leverage that power of the collective, and that could be in sharing funding, that could just be to kind of increase that sphere of influence that we have. And then finally, this idea that we want to do something where we are leaders of cultural change, so that we're not just providing information through an outreach campaign, but we're really doing something that comes from within the culture. And I think working in Oregon, we kind of have a good head start here. We want to do something that's really meaningful, so it's not just like government kind of telling people what to do, which is often what we do. Watershed councils and conservation districts don't do that, and so we really want to partner with you because I think you have the pulse on kind of what's happening in the community. The framework for what we wanted to do is fairly simple. First, we wanted to connect people to their rivers. We know that a large majority of Oregonians feel that they are somewhat or very connected to the rivers already, and so again, we have a good start. We have strong Oregon values in this area. Next, we want to connect people's behaviors to their rivers. Now, we know that a good majority of people feel like they do have a role here, but we realize that a lot of people kind of just don't know what to do. Like, how do their behaviors actually impact the river? So we want to make that connection for people. And then finally, we want to promote these clean water behaviors. So this campaign that we're trying to do is not just about awareness, where we kind of educate people on some of the science and the facts, but we want to kind of get people involved to actually do those behaviors, and we want to lead people into those behaviors by understanding what are some of the barriers, what are some of the gaps that people need to kind of make that shift. Again, and doing so in a kind of a cultural way. Oops. Oops, sorry about that. The nature of the campaign is this. So we recognize that clean water is not a local issue. It's not just a local issue. It's really a regional issue or statewide or really even a national issue. And so we want to address water pollution as it is, as a statewide issue. So that's why we're trying to bid this big, broad campaign. We also want to use new tools like social media in the way that it is intended to be used and at the scales that it can be used. We also recognize that both science and social marketing are needed to change behavior. And then finally, we want to create this new voice, to create this new messenger for clean water that doesn't exist today. You know, something that is loud and strong, that unifies all of us in the work that we do. The conversations that we've had so far over the past several years, we've pulled together 5 forums where we've invited watershed councils, conservation districts, water-related nonprofits, state and federal agencies, as well as municipalities, to get together to say, what is it that we're really trying to do? And some of the conversations that we've had so far, first, what are the pollutants that we should prioritize for outreach? There's a lot of disagreement, but there's just a wide array of things that we should be considering. So if we're going to do something broadly, what is it that we want to kind of narrow into? And then also, what is a statewide campaign look like? And how does that interface with the local programs? We know that there's some messages at the local level that we want to kind of raise up, and then there's maybe some umbrella messages that we want to kind of send down. And how does that work? And then how do we tell stories about our waters? And then how do we reach people where they are? Again, these are kind of ideas about how do we create the culture around clean water. And hopefully the strategy today will give some insights into that. So, okay, and then finally, our partnerships. We recognize that this campaign and this coalition really is about partners, because watershed councils, conservation districts, municipalities, state agencies, federal agencies, we all have like a role, but it may not be really clear, like, how are we all going to work together if we want to do something together? And so we pulled together these forums, and we've been so blessed. We've had over 60 organizations participate in these forums. We've had a lot of great input. We've had 20 municipalities provide some funding, and so we have a little savings account here where we're going to be using that money in the next year or so. And then finally, the presentation that we're showing today, this strategy, has been funded through a grant from the Myra Memorial Trust Willamette River Initiative. This is a really great opportunity that we've had working with them to provide seed money for us. And so we're looking forward to seeing your feedback on our work, and hopefully we'll share some opportunities for that at the end. All right, I know that was a quick, very brief introduction. If you have more questions, if you can reach out to myself or any of our steering committee members, that will share information after the webinar. And also go to cleanriverscoalition.com. There'll be a sign up there for a newsletter, and we periodically give updates on what we've been up to. And if you can kind of sign in there, then we'll be able to communicate with you all if you have more interest in questions. And there's also a form in there as well if you want to provide comments or send questions directly to us, and then we can get you connected with somebody who can answer them. All right, that was a quick 5 minutes, hopefully maybe not too much. I'm going to shift this over now to Alex Danielson, who will give us an introduction on that pollutant database. Alex, do you want to take the show?
Thanks, Roy. Hopefully I am audible, but so I am going to do a quick run through about a tool that we use to help prioritize pollutants to focus on for our campaign. And so, as Roy introduced, the Clean Rivers Coalition was setting out to create a clean water behavior change campaign with content that would speak to Oregonians' shared values and identities. But first, we needed to find and focus our message. And so we needed a way to assess what pollutants pose the biggest threat to Oregon waters, and from there, determine which of those pollutants were ideal candidates for a behavior change campaign. And in the slide here, as you can see, we needed a tool to help us evaluate multiple risk factors so that we could navigate an environment of infinite risks and ultimately prioritize actions. So I'm going to flag Roy when to switch the slide since he's in control. So go ahead, Roy. So this not so uplifting slide speaks to my comment on infinite risks. So 47%, or 40,655 of the 86,228 chemicals are currently in commerce. So that's more of the number to focus on, other than this sort of daunting 86,000. And many of these chemicals have not been thoroughly studied for their impacts. And there are chemicals that are banned and no longer in commerce that still persist in our waters and sediments and can work their way up the food chain. Now, not all of the 47,000 chemicals are used here in Oregon, and many of those aren't making it into our waters. But nevertheless, this is a glimpse into the need to prioritize in order for us to make some progress in this realm. So go ahead, Roy. So the solution. So to address this need, we developed an accessible toolbox that aggregates Oregon relevant water-specific data, looking at specific variables, including information on distribution, fate and transport, and toxicity to humans, fish, and insects. Go ahead. So this database was developed in part as part of my master's and in partnership with the City of Gresham and the Clean Rivers Coalition. And Carrie Handley from the City of Gresham was the mastermind behind this database. She was the one who originally developed the idea of a tool that would help prioritize pollutants all sort of in one place to maximize limited resources. So we worked together to build the database, and we continue to work together. It is a living database, and so we are adding data as we go, as it becomes available. And so prior to building out the database, we conducted an extensive literature review to provide peer-reviewed support for the data that we are including in the database and as a destination for additional information. We decided in the database to focus specifically on consumer product chemicals, metals, and pesticides. And that pesticides umbrella includes insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. So each chemical included in the database has data on source, so where it's coming from, fate and transport, so its mobility and solubility in water, its toxicity to humans, fish, and insects, any benchmark data that's available, so aquatic life benchmarks and human health benchmarks, and then whether or not it's being detected in Oregon waters and at what levels. So basically, we wanted to include all of the data about the chemical itself, but then we also wanted to know what's actually in our water here, and is it being detected at levels of concern above benchmarks. So the key element of this database is the presentation of toxicology data. So that's the categories that designate the toxicity to humans, fish, and invertebrates. So this data is presented on a numeric scale that designates a level of risk that allows a user of the database to assign a rank to one chemical compared to another. And that's so that decisions can be made to inform action. So the risk scale is assigned in line with established and recognized systems. So for example, the EPA classification on cancer, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So whenever there was a classification list or a list like that, that's how we developed our risk scale. And extensive effort was taken to clearly and simply define these levels within the scale. So valuations are based on weight of evidence as assessed by reviewing these multiple peer-reviewed databases and sources for each target and each type of toxicity. So those types of toxicity include whether it's a carcinogen, a mutagen, whether it's an endocrine disruptor, etc. So it's worth acknowledging that the use of a ranking system comes with a certain level of subjectivity. But again, this tool is used to navigate an environment of infinite risks and limited resources, and then prioritize actions from there. So go ahead, Roy. So the database in its actual form is a large Excel spreadsheet, but for the sake of legibility and sanity in a PowerPoint presentation, I've condensed one chemical line pretty significantly down to show you what some of the data looks like. So this is an example of DDT, and you'll see the human average here. So that's the average of the carcinogen, mutagen, endocrine disruptor, developmental, reproductive, all of those toxicity risks into one. The animal average is the average of toxicity to insects and fish. Surface water is the average of its mobility and solubility, and all of that is pulled together to an overall average of 1.4. And then we normalized it, taking it from a scale of 0 to 2 up to 1 to 10, so that you have a little bit more of a spread out view of comparison in order to make decisions from there. And so these normalized scores and comparison of other components in the database can be useful in a number of ways, depending on what your needs and goals are. And what's missing in this example is that benchmark data, if it exists, which that's a known data gap. A lot of these chemicals don't have any benchmark information. So we don't know at what levels they are toxic to humans or fish or insects. And then any data of how it's being detected in Oregon and what levels. And that data is largely from Pesticide Stewardship Partnership data, which is DEQ and ODA data, and USGS data. So go ahead, Roy. So getting back to the Clean Rivers Coalition, we reviewed the database, and based on the scores and this regional detection of chemicals and several other factors important to the campaign, we were able to hone in on 2 areas that we believed would be the most likely targets for behavior change. So that's the reduction of use of pesticides, and specifically insecticides and herbicides, and then the reduction of use of fertilizers. Go ahead, Roy. This slide and the next one show how specifically pesticides ranked out in the database. And so I'll just highlight a few things. Interestingly, the #1 ranked chemical was propiconazole, which who knows if I'm saying these right, but you know, the Google will tell you, but they all get mixed up in my head. But propiconazole is a fungicide, and so that ranked really high in the database. There's also lots of weed and feed. There's broadleaf weed treatments, triclopyr, and then several insecticides. And Ray, you can skip to the next one. And so this is again the kind of bottom half of that top list. You can see glyphosate on here, which is Roundup. You may recognize a fair amount of these. Okay, next one, Roy. And so in an effort to take that top list of pesticides and further refine the list and get a sense for what is being used locally and regionally here in Oregon, Carrie from the city of Gresham conducted several shelf surveys in a variety of stores in the Portland metro area, and we hope to expand that statewide as well, basically going out and seeing which of these chemicals are found on the shelves under which trade names. And so these are some of the things that Carrie found. Lots of weed and feed combinations that include mixes of things like 2,4-D and diuron. Triclopyr is one of the most common chemicals you'll find on the shelves, particularly this time of year for things like blackberry and other woody vines. Lots of fungicides on the shelves. An interesting array of insecticides, and then a lot of broadleaf chemicals. And this bifenthrin here is highlighted just to note that DEQ has flagged this chemical as being detected over aquatic life benchmarks when it's found in Oregon waters, and particularly in urban waters. So, and we do find it on the shelves in local stores, and so that's that's to note that it's being found in urban environments, and when it gets into our water, it's oftentimes found above aquatic life benchmarks. So that's a chemical that we're able to kind of really hone in as a key target for a behavior change campaign. And go ahead, Roy. This is just, oh, is that coming up?
I seem to have lost my feed here. Sorry about this. Give me 1 second.
Well, I'll talk about it in the meantime. So this would be just my last slide, and I just want to note that the database was built as a resource that could help all of us working in the realm of protecting water quality to help us make informed decisions and which pollutants to prioritize and focus in on for any campaign or outreach work. So we wanted to make sure that it was easily accessible and user-friendly. The user-friendly part is in the works, but in the meantime, it is accessible on the Northwest Open Data Exchange, or NODE. So if you Google the Northwest Open Data Exchange, or if this slide comes up, you see the link. But and you'll see it in the slide deck afterwards. But it lives there, which is it's an open data platform that's housed at the Portland State Institute of Portland Metropolitan Studies, and it's again an open data source. And once you get in there, if you search for the Oregon Pollutant Risk Database, you'll be able to pull it up and see it there, and it's in all of its Excel spreadsheet glory. And again, if you have any questions about the database or accessing it, or have additional data to share that we could plug in, definitely let me or Carrie know. And that's it for the database.
Okay. Apologies, my internet seems to have failed here at my house. This is very unusual. If you can give me just 1 second, and we will see if I can actually get back onto the regular show. This is the problem here of working from home.
If anybody has any questions, we can do a quick questions break. And Roy, if you want me to try and pull it up, I can do that as well.
Yeah. Vanessa, can we have a little technical support? Could you pull this up and share your screen?
I sure can. It would take me a second to advance to the correct slide. Can you tell me which number?
Let's see here. I don't know. I can't. I've kind of lost my whole screen. Jeez.
Here, look.
Uh-oh. It's okay. I can share my screen, and then you can tell me where to go. Let's see here.
I think it'll be the start
Thanks
of the Brink,
with us.
Yeah,
Brink
it's the start.
presentation. It's blue.
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
No.
All right. Show my screen. Okay. So people can see a paused version of your screen. Click to resume screen sharing. Okay. All right, so you guys should be able to see my screen now. So you see all of those lovely faces. So now here's this. Sorry, you're gonna see all of my things here. Okay. All right, so I can advance your slides. Okay. Okay, which slide are we on? Out of 72, do you think?
Probably somewhere in the 30s.
Okay.
Here we go.
Right here?
Back it up. A couple slides, 2 slides. Oh, other way.
Go back?
Yes.
Here.
Keep going. You're almost
Okay.
there.
There?
2 more. 2 more. There we go.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go
Thanks,
plug
Vanessa.
into a bigger monitor. Okay, you guys can go ahead and just next when you need the next slide, and I'll advance it.
Okay, do you want to go into full screen and make it easier for people to see?
All right, hold on just a second. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. As we're all working from home, we have these technical challenges, don't we? All right. Okay. All right, now did everyone follow? Can you still see my screen?
Yes, but we can't see the presentation.
All right, so is it in full screen mode now for you? No.
I think you have to select and go to meeting that specific screen that's full screen right now.
All
So
right,
right
I'm
now, yeah,
afraid
we're
that's
just
the
looking.
best I can do.
Okay.
You get it. Can you guys see it big enough?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I'm back. I've got my screen back here.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Vanessa, it looks like I'm back online, and so I've got my screen back up if you want to share that.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think my audio is not working now. All right. You know what? I think this on my end, I'm having some problems. Can one of you please pull up the slide presentation on
Yep.
your end, and I will change you
Yep.
to be the presenter. Who raise your hand if you're that person? We'll take
Vanessa,
over.
I'm back.
Roy's back? Okay.
Yeah, Roy's back. Yep.
All
If you
right.
can show,
When did you get back to Roy?
allow me to share my screen, I can get back.
Okay. Roy, you're back.
Okay. All right. Do you see the screen? All right. Great. So here's that last slide there that has the link at the top, opendata.imspdx.org. And then we will move on. Here is solve pests and the campaign playbook. Apologies, folks.
All right. Yeah, thank you for bearing with us on that. So the Brink and Good Morning teams are excited to share our campaign playbook that we are developing for the Clean Rivers Coalition with you today. Roy, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, one before, one back. I just want to look at the agenda for the table of contents. So as we move through this deck, we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I do want to spend just a few minutes providing a little bit of context about what you're going to see in the presentation. So first, everything that we do, and as you heard from Roy, really is rooted in behavior change, right? Awareness is great, but we need people to take action. So we want to spend just a few minutes talking about the different behavior change theories that are informing our approach. We also want to share some highlights of the comprehensive research that Brink and CRC did in 2019. Then we'll share with you the meat of our presentation, which is how we take that learning and put it into action through a communications plan and really get the right messages to our audiences through the right channel. And finally, we're going to share a little bit about the creative tools and assets that need to be created to put this campaign into action and make it come alive. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. You can advance, Roy. Yeah, there. So just a very high-level look at what we're looking at today. This is a multi-year strategic outreach and marketing plan to expand, coordinate, and unify public education and outreach that connects Oregonians to their rivers and streams and encourages behaviors that lead to clean water. And you can go ahead and advance. And before we jump in, I pass it off to my colleague, Annie. It always feels important to talk about why. Why are we doing this right now? You know, pandemic aside, this really is an issue for our lifetime. As Alex laid out, we are at a moment of critical risk and infinite risk. And we know that we have the collective power as humans on our planet to take action, and that action really can make a difference. And we have this coalition that is set up and ready to go. So the moment's now. Annie, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to you.
Great, thank you. You can stop here, Roy. So as Roy outlined in the beginning of the presentation, our goal is really behavior change. Many times what we see floating out in the world are awareness campaigns that are really designed to change someone's view about something or to help them understand something better. Behavior change campaigns are a little different, and they have been going on for a while. But they have lots of promising practices are out there that we can build from. And what this is all about is really breaking down complex change, that long-term goal, into clear action steps so that we can reach people where and when they are ready. It's also important to remember that while behaviors can change, values are slower to change. Values and beliefs are slower to change. So awareness campaigns actually take longer to move people than a behavior change campaign, which can really connect with people, their values, their beliefs, and help them feel motivated to change. So we want to know what that core value is that's really driving that behavior change. And in doing that, we know we can't just lead with the facts and figures, and that we really have to open people's hearts and minds to the message. Next. So we drew on the principles of two theoretical models to inform this plan. The community-based social marketing model, which is designed really as an alternative to that more information or fact-based campaign approach to behavior change. There are 5 steps to developing a community-based social marketing campaign, starting with identifying what behaviors you are trying to change, and then identifying what are the barriers to making those changes, and what are the benefits, the perceived benefits of changing those behaviors. Then you work to develop strategies to help people change their behaviors, some of which are getting people to agree to an initial commitment so that they then are more likely to follow through with their request. Norming behavior really as an expected behavior rather than telling people what not to do or what to stop doing. Relying on those peer-to-peer relationships, that social diffusions, to really speed up the adoption of behaviors. Providing prompts when people are in those moments where they're making a key decision. Using those effective messages that really tap into the values, and providing incentives wherever possible to motivate people. And finally, focusing on making it convenient, really addressing any of those external barriers. There are internal barriers, but there are also external barriers, those things that are kind of keeping people from being able to make the right choice. So then after kind of developing those strategies, you develop a pilot, or you conduct a pilot and then expand it more broad scale. The other behavior change theory we really relied on was the trans-theoretical model of change, which is a way of thinking about how individuals make behavior changes over time. This is not something that happens overnight, but usually rather is a progression through multiple stages, and sometimes a regression and then progression. So you can see in the top left-hand corner of that diagram, it starts with pre-contemplation, which is when the audience really has no intention of changing behavior and little to no awareness of the problem. They then move into contemplation, which is where the audience is kind of aware that a problem might exist and understands maybe some of the costs and benefits of changing behaviors, but has not really made any commitments. Then you have preparation, where they're becoming more intent on making that behavior change. Usually it's just one small action, not a huge life-changing strategy. And then they act. There's that action point where they take a specific action to modify their behavior. And even then, it's not over. They still have to kind of maintain that behavior over time. And usually what they say is 6 months in this model. It's 6 months is when it's considered that you've actually replaced that new behavior with the old, or that old behavior with the new behavior. But there's still a risk of then relapse, that yellow band, which if we don't keep up the social pressure and the expectation and the reward, of changing the behavior, people might then fall back into their old patterns. So these two models really inform the research process and are carried through to the communication plan you'll see later. Next. So I am going to speed through a year-long worth of research in 15 minutes. So it may seem a little brief, but I think it'll give you some context as to what the what went into the work here and what we've used to inform the communications plan moving forward. But I don't want to take too much time away from the communications plan itself. So what we really wanted to know was what motivates folks, what are their values, what are they doing now, how might they be willing to change their behavior. And first we looked at research, at what research had been done already. We know there had been surveys done, focus groups, things like that. And we knew from past surveys of Oregonians done by DHM Research that that Oregonians really care about their drinking water and the health of rivers, lakes, and streams. So their top tier priorities are health, their health, safety, water purity, and that we have adequate supply of water into the future. Second tier priorities, and still a priority, is habitat and recreation. So making sure that all of those activities are safe and also that the environment is protected. Next. And you've already heard about the priority pollutant database. So we just wanted to capture that this was a really important part of the research process in kind of mapping out what the potential pollutants were for focusing on. Next. So next we worked with the Clean Rivers Coalition team to further prioritize the list of priority pollutants and understand kind of what does current literature say about people's willingness to change their behaviors around each of the top pollutants. And we narrowed it down to kind of 6 categories of fertilizers, herbicides and mossicides, insecticides, pharmaceuticals, sunscreen, and kind of the batteries, electronic waste, and paints. And those were, the behaviors were kind of centered around each one of those. With, fertilizers, we're asking people to switch to using only slow release or natural organic options. Herbicides, we're asking people to pull weeds or spot spray or use natural alternatives. So there were just a series of behavior asks, and then moving all the way down to batteries, where we would ask people to recycle and reuse, where there's evidence that those are behaviors that people are more willing to try. So in the end, as Alex indicated, we decided we would get the most traction really focusing on reducing the use of pesticides and reducing the use of fertilizer. Next. So then we pulled together a panel of scientific and issue area experts. We wanted to know where did they see the most momentum for change and what else we should consider in developing the campaign. They also weighed in on what the priority pollutants should be, what priority behaviors should be. And really the advice they gave us was to focus on the areas of disproportionate impact to marginalized communities, who is being impacted the most by these pollutants being in the water. To, of course, focus on where are people willing to make those changes, to build momentum where we could on any current activities among partners, any regulatory actions, any policy actions that might be in place or might be in place in the future. And one of those was the integrated pest management tool that OSU Extension is developing. And to reflect the issues that matter to community partners, understanding that they are really key to this process, and that we wanted to address more than one pollutant of concern at a time, because we needed to move the dial, often one behavior applied to multiple pollutants. All right, now, Roy. So next we did stakeholder interviews. So you can see the names of organizations represented in the interviews on the left, mainly coalition member organizations across the state. And we wanted to get an understanding of what was really working on the ground already. Where did folks see the opportunities and gaps? And this was really about getting smart by talking to the people who are already doing the work. So we found that effective messages really focused on connecting people to their water, telling them this is where you fish, paddle, and play. This is your drinking water. Focused on safety issues, focused on showing people the impact, the visible impact that their actions are having, addressing issues of cost, and really advocating one small step at a time, not that changing everything all at once, and asking for pledges or commitments. A lot of those themes that we kind of saw in those models of change that we've already looked at. Ineffective, again, shaming or blaming folks, talking about too many, showing them too many facts and figures, really limiting their options, or having too much of an air of environmentalism. Next. Also in the interviews, we talked about which audiences they're reaching through their current activities of tabling and events and programs. Children through school events and parents are more easy to reach for them right now. White, middle income and middle-aged audiences are more accessible to them, as well as having the resources to kind of make the changes. And then landowners in riparian areas are seeing the visible impacts, and so they're highly motivated, as well as farmers who are often given incentives to change, and then recreation staff and leaders. And who are they trusting? Who are those trusted messengers? Right now, it's those friends and peers and folks who they're seeing on a day-to-day basis, local leaders, local newspapers, and where they're seeing the gaps is, or where they see the opportunities to reach folks, is really in the reaching out to speakers of languages other than English, particularly Spanish and Russian, looking at kind of the more urban or residential centers outside of Portland metro area. So not kind of the farmers and landowners along riparian areas, but what are those urban centers look like outside of Portland metro, and also landscapers and tourists. And again, we asked them what they want out of a statewide campaign. What should it include? What would be most helpful for them in their efforts? And here's what they said. They want a unified message, something that would connect all of the disparate but related efforts across the state. They want to just tell people, they don't want to just tell people what to do, but why it's important. And they want to also increase their own capacity to reach more people in effective ways. They realize that capacity is limited. They also want the messages to be grounded locally, not a statewide message that is not relevant to their local audiences. And to help people understand the concept of one water, or that water can be used and reused again, and that we have to keep it clean. And finally, again, linking messages as much as possible to specific local waterways, and then lifting up those people who are already doing great work and making a huge impact in their local waterways, so that we can model that behavior. Next, we did a survey. So this was, we worked with DHM to conduct an online survey of 1,000 residents, which were representative of a statewide demographic. And we looked at what is their connection to rivers, streams, and lakes, what are their perceptions about insecticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, and what is their willingness to change their behaviors around yard care related to these. And the first thing one takeaway, I guess I should say, is that 74% of people felt really connected already to their local waterways. So that's the diagram on the left. And those who take part in activities in their local rivers, lakes, and streams are much more likely to feel that connection than those who don't, which is the other diagram there. So they believe the Oregonians, feel connected, and they believe this is important work to be done. Next. The interesting thing is that most people have more than an inkling that these products have risks, right? So they're reporting that they think these products would harm fish and wildlife health, that they are going to run off into local waterways, and that they might harm people as well. They already are coming in with this perception. 2/3 of people say these products aren't safe, and they're uncertain whether they're removed by wastewater treatment. So that's an area for education. Next. And not surprisingly, homeowners are more use more of these toxic products than those who rent. They often use them in combination with weeds being kind of the primary problem that they want to solve. And of those people who use these products, most of them are using them for weeds. And those who are using them for weeds are kind of then using the other products as well. So you can kind of see that funny circle diagram there shows that weed control is sort of like the gateway drug for pesticides. Okay, slide 19, next. And the good news is that people reported that they are willing to change their behavior. 68% say they are likely to change, which, you know, we take that with a grain of salt. People say they're going to do something all the time, but I think that that's overwhelmingly positive. The top barrier to change for them is cost. They think it's going to cost them more money and that it will be less effective in the long run to use an alternative to what they're already using. I think that there are ways to kind of couch that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the messaging section, but in general, you know, highlighting how we are avoiding harm to living beings and the environment was a positive message that people resonated with. And also rural residents really placed a premium on that effectiveness, a little bit more so than the more urban audiences. And they also just report feeling more connected to their bodies of water. Next. So then we conducted focus groups. We worked with DHM to conduct 2 focus groups, one in Portland and one in Medford, to learn about more specifically about how those folks who do use chemicals to care for their yards, how they're making those decisions and how open they might be to behavior change, and to test messages and images, which we'll get to in a minute. Let's see here, get my place. So the interesting thing is that even people who are using chemical products in their yard care routinely, they're still uncertain and wary about these products. You know, when you really kind of push them, they or not even push them that hard, they already start to kind of reveal their doubts about whether these products are safe. So they also generally understand that products run off and cause harm, that they're concerned about the impacts on watersheds, but they still continue to choose these products because they are more effective. You can see in the quotes, it's so conflicting. I'm just so confused. You see Roundup is harmful to people because of cancer and non-Hodgkin's, you know, and yet people are still buying it. They're still selling Roundup. So the fact that it's available and readily available is a confusing message to them. Next. So a little bit on trusted messengers. Right now, people are, you know, going online to get their information. They're doing searches. They're asking local clerks and experts, master gardeners and folks like that about advice on what to do in their yards. But most of all, they are calling their dad, their grandma, their friend who they know has a beautiful garden. So it's good to know that this is a very peer-to-peer decision-making process that folks are making. They're doing what their mom did when they were growing up. So it's very personal and connected to their values. They're also, just one more point on that previous slide, there we go. People are open to trying familiar alternatives. So they are open to hand pulling their weeds. They're open to a few other options. They see them as safer and frankly somewhat comparable in terms of effectiveness. What the barriers are again those high costs and the difficulty of use. It's going to be harder for me to pull all my weeds than to just spray them. Now, next. So as part of the focus group, we wanted to also test some draft messages and images to find out what was most motivating for participants. And this is kind of what we call a mood board. So you see there are two options here. One is larger, but we tested one option which was very focused on kind of the images of rivers, lakes, and streams and people's connection to the waterways themselves. And then the other option was really focused on the home and that environment, keeping that environment safe and then connecting it in a more theoretical way to the larger environment and waterways. And participants really preferred mood board A for the images that portrayed of rivers, lakes, and streams. They had this warm feeling when they saw that one versus the other. It felt familiar. It felt like it fit into their lifestyle. And if they didn't exactly, they're not the type to go out and play by the river or kayak, it was sort of an aspirational connection that they had with it, the lifestyle that they kind of wish that they had. Next. And lastly, we asked what specifically people would do in terms of behavior change. What calls to action seemed most accessible to them? But they were most likely to consult an online database because they really saw this as an easy, accessible way to get information about what products are safe to use and how to use them. Right now, they're looking up these problems, how to solve weed problems and pest problems anyway online. And so this is really a great way to reach them when they're in that decision-making process. They're also open to choosing yard care professionals who use responsible practices or making an herbicide-free pledge themselves or pesticide-free pledge themselves, but they are not the types to put a sign in their yard and profess their support for that kind of thing. Next. So that pretty much wraps up the research phase. There are a few key insights that I'll just highlight before I pass it off to Josh and Charles. A few key insights for the plan. So we want to make sure that while this is a behavior change campaign, there is a level of awareness that we're trying to build about people's connection to their local waterways and how their actions are connected to the health of rivers, lakes, and streams. So just creating that basic understanding is going to be important. Also creating a statewide scaffolding that supports localized outreach. So making sure that there is a larger structure in place where then the local entities and partners can really customize locally, but there's a structure that is supporting everyone to have a consistent message and look and feel. We want to make sure that we make a series of behavior change asks that build on each other over time. We know we can't come out with everything all at once. That would be too overwhelming. One ask at a time, and then as that becomes the norm, then it's time to move on to the next ask and the next ask. We want to use local ambassadors and influencers to reach audiences, knowing that those are the most trusted sources that are being accessed right now. And we want to use digital platforms that meet people where they're at when they're making those decisions. So when they're already looking up how to solve these problems. And finally, to include partnership strategies that really demonstrate the strength of how connected all of these disparate efforts are, and that we can remove more barriers and really expand our reach the more we all work together.
Great. Thank you, Annie.
You all.
Hey, so we're Josh and Charles, and I know we're in the last section, so we'll try to keep this entertaining and try to zip through kind of this last section. So this will be kind of a marketing crash course, but also we want to start showing how we're going to apply a lot of those research learnings. But ultimately, we just want to inspire how we can start working together and start empowering everyday Oregonians. So Roy, you can hop to the next slide. Kind of just starts with kind of an overall communication goal of what do we want to do with our marketing and communications. And what Annie was saying in her last slide, yep, it's about sparking awareness and education amongst Oregonians for how personal actions are tied to the health in our water, and to motivate behavior change amongst key audiences, reduce their impact on the rivers, lakes, and streams, and really start just empowering everyday Oregonians. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to start with, well, yeah, who do we want to reach? Who do we want to target and start building relationships with? And the different audiences that we have are what we're calling clean water families and clean water caretakers on this slide. And this is primarily kind of the everyday kind of Oregonian that we want to go after. And on the bottom, the second half are just different ways that we can use, you know, digital marketing to target them, whether that's by ethnicity or by income levels or by, you know, their vocation. But later on, as we get into this, you can start seeing how we can pull different marketing levers to start reaching these people, and with very specific messages pertaining to where they are along their behavior change cycle. So these are our primary audience. Roy, on the next slide, what we wanted to also keep in mind were our coalition partners, as well as kind of an audience that we wanted to reach and impact as well. We know that a lot of you on the phone are also very vital in creating this change in Oregon. So we still want to be mindful of our stakeholders and our partners. And I think this is probably a little different than when we talk to everyday Oregonians, but yeah, how do we create the right relationships, communications, messaging to keep stakeholders and partners informed, empowered, inspired, all those things too. So we know that that's a work stream as well in terms of the type of communications we want to create. And so if you go to the next section, Roy, we know that adoption of clean water actions won't happen overnight. And so what we want to walk you through is just almost an immediate action plan, but also even a long-term action plan too, in terms of what do we want to do with our marketing communications. And so, Roy, if you have the next slide, this is just an overview to lay out some of the terms that we'll be using along this presentation. There are primarily 3 types of communications that we'll turn on. One is paid communications, and this is primarily what you see in mass advertising, or, you know, whether that's in print, radio, outdoor, television, or even on using social media and sponsored posts and all that stuff. But this is where you can guarantee your scale and reach. You have your own communications as well as a layer that we can tap into, and that is our own email lists. That's our own ambassadors. That's the events that we hold. Those are our own internal communication channels that we get to activate. And lastly, the third layer of communications is earned communications. And this is primarily just like PR, organic press that gets picked up, word of mouth messaging goes here. And so you can see that there's within these 3 layers, okay, how do we orchestrate them together so that they can all, you know, work together to create an effective, communications push. So this is just kind of level setting for us, kind of the types of communications we want to be tapping into. And on the next couple slides, this starts to just show, okay, our approach for where we show up, what we're going to say, and these are kind of just, I think, the snapshots, right, of what we want to do. So looking at what we wanted to start with the model of individual change, and we wanted to layer in just the desired responses at every step of the journey. And I won't walk through each of those things, but at each stage, you can see like, oh, we want to at least provoke this type of thought. Or when you get to engagement, when people want to learn more, okay, I want to learn more, I want to be equipped, okay, how do we satisfy that? And even as they're taking action, kind of the desired behavior out of that is, hey, they're changing their behavior. Are there incentives that are kind of rewarding my behavior? And then when you get to maintenance, it's a lot about reminding people to keep reinforcing those behaviors, or we can, hero them for the efforts that they're doing, or even reward them as well. But throughout each of the stages, we started defining, what is the takeaway that we want for people. And then if you go to the next slide, we started layering in, okay, the role of different communications and where they can help take people along the journey. And primarily for that first 2 stages where we're just creating awareness about, what our mission is, but also to address very specific initiatives like against pesticides, for example. That's a lot of our paid and owned marketing can kick off here in just creating that awareness. And then as people want to learn more, we can create a digital kind of hub or destination where people can learn more about how the pros and cons of what they can do. It could be a place where they can learn about resources of, action items that they can take. And, you know, as we equip them and they start taking action, I think where we could show up again is in the maintenance cycle, where we are using our communication channels again to remind people where they can, you know, play their role, where we could trigger them to take the right actions. We can use our communications to hero kind of the stories of positive change, of even communal change as well. And so this model kind of just helps us start organizing, okay, the types of things that we want to start using. And lastly, on the next slide, Roy, we wanted to layer on kind of the different strategies from the community-based social marketing theory that was above, where you can start seeing the different types of messages that we want to start using so that we could take people, you know, to the next step in this journey. And with that kind of framework in place, I'll pass it to Charles to start talking through, you know, even more specifically the different messages that we want to use along this journey. Cool.
Yeah, so now that you guys kind of understand the target audiences we aim to kind of raise awareness with and create behavior change with, as well as the model in which we'll kind of take them on a journey to getting them from not being aware of this at all the way through to being advocates of creating healthy water. We also need to start thinking about the messaging around how we bring that to life. What are we going to actually say to all of our audiences that can motivate them and inspire them to be a part of the change here? And so on the next slide, we've broken it down into 3 layers of messaging that we believe are really, really important in order to create a long-standing conversation here. So the first top layer being CRC led. What this means is we need a layer of messaging that establishes the coalition's vision and mission under one umbrella around clean water. The references we like to give are like the New York Times' Truth Campaign, how it's a bold, provocative statement that whenever you see brings to life an idea that you can then rally around. So, you know, Annie will talk about this in a second, but we want to start exploring what is the big umbrella halo message that we can bring to life that we can constantly reinforce to our target audiences. The second layer here is about emotionally led messaging, and this is drilling down deeper into creating emotional resonance with the greater why on aiding statewide clean water. As you know, people need to understand like why clean water is healthy for our environment and their lives. We think that these would be more seasonal initiatives or the seasonal messages that can really like pinpoint how different people can create change. And then the bottom layer here being rationally led messages. How way everyone can practically participate and play their role. So again, these would be seasonal messages that are look at them as your tips and tricks as to really how to engage yourself. And so on the next slide, when you look at it as a full kind of 3-layered approach, you're going to see how all 3 kind of messaging tiers work together. So you have a big umbrella message up top. You have your emotional messages that are here to inspire you based on different moments throughout the year. And then you have the bottom layer of rational messaging that are, again, your really hard-hitting educational points that tell you exactly what to do. And so when those 3 work together, we believe that this is an initiative and an effort that you know will continue to raise awareness and be top of mind. And so Annie's going to give you a couple quick examples here of what we're talking about with those 3 layers.
Jump in, Annie. So we went ahead and put together a set of example messages for you guys, so you can just start to see what this might look like. In the brand messaging examples here, this is really going to be the top of your hierarchy of the campaign. It could be what the campaign's name is. We put Clean Rivers Coalition, Clean Rivers Start With Us. That starts to give you the context of like a name and a tagline. We don't know that it's going to be that. It probably isn't that, but it would start to give you the idea of what that starts to look like. It's really like, this is what we're doing and why we exist. And then in the emotional messages, an example would be when our rivers are clean, our fish and wildlife stay healthy, and so do we. We're appealing to what people care about. We're giving them an emotional benefit inside those messages. And finally, rational messages are really about taking action. What is a specific thing you can do? These end up looking a lot like calls to action when they're in practice out in the world on advertising on collateral pieces. But you can start to see how we're moving people down from the what to the why to the how. Okay, go to the next slide.
Yep, and so now we start to break that down into the next few years of how do we want to approach marketing kind of in the broadest sense, like where do we want to start making headway and how do we grow this into a larger conversation in years to come. So on the next slide, we have some overarching goals that we'll break down. So for year one, this is our start, right? What we need to do first and foremost is promote clean water and build local community support in minimizing priority pollutants. This isn't an effort that's been around for years that everybody knows about. So really through all the research and all the conversations we've been having, starting with a community-based approach that organically introduces this conversation is where we need to begin. And how do we introduce lightweight budgets that can help amplify some of those messages in environments that really take advantage of those who are interested at the early phases. Year two is when we start to hopefully prove our impact from the opening conversations and really start to grow our tactics to combat new home and public health pollutants. So the approach here is like we need to continue to open doors year after year. We need to open up new avenues of communications with new communities and like keep ramping up and elevating our internal and external resources so that we have the tools in place to be able to spread those messages out even further. And then year three, and again, we're using years as kind of placeholders. These are journeys that we're going on that all kind of work together. But year three, hopefully, is when we can hit a bit more of a critical mass where, awareness has ramped up, partners have hopped on board, resourcing has, elevated, and we're now finally able to really tackle like paid media, paid marketing channels that can hit all Oregonians statewide. And so Josh, real quick, is going to break down some of the recommended tactics specifically for year one. We zoom in on year one because we have to figure out what our starting point is. As much as we would love to predict the future, there's still a lot of variables, but we want to make sure we can get this off to a good start.
Yeah, and we for year one, we try to stay practical as well. We're not proposing like Super Bowl commercials yet. But we wanted to do an audit of just, okay, what do we have that's available to us, but also what are some of the external resources we need to tap into? So right here is kind of the foundational building blocks we're thinking of using for year one from, and I'll just quickly kind of go through the columns because I think it'll be good to even as you're listening to this, I'm sure you can start sprouting off different ideas, but for grassroots communications, it's a lot of our physical touch points, whether that's like flyers and mailers and stuff. For PR media, I mean, if we start going through our Rolodex and hey, who in the media, whether that's with different news outlets or kind of community or industry kind of outlets, like who do we have relationships with where we can start priming them to help tell our stories of the initiatives that we're about to start. I believe we all probably have some sort of mailing list of people who are interested in more news or who have signed up, at different events. But how can we start using those, and organizing them to start working together? Because those are kind of our initial advocates that we could tap into. When it comes to digital media, this is probably where we probably the only piece where we'd want to look into spending money against it, and primarily just in search. That as people are looking for stuff on Google, it's a really simple tactic and it's very, very efficient tactic in terms of intercepting people if they're looking for pesticides or lawn care and stuff, and how do we intercept them with the right communications. Obviously, our social media presence, if we do have them, if we have accounts, can be an outlet where we can communicate to our communities. And that second to last column, thinking about the ambassadors that we have, who are megaphones that we have, whether those are people like Roy who go on television, or different people that we know who are champions for different causes that align with us. How can we use them in their audiences? And just kind of broadly, just thinking about different organizations, whether private or nonprofit, that can join us and probably add their credibility or kind of their message on top of ours in spreading kind of our initial initiative. So this is kind of the building blocks that we're starting with. And Roy, if you go to the next slide, this is kind of a more linear look at what Charles was talking about, but starting to layer in some of these tactics that we're talking about using over the years. And yeah, as we grow over time, we could get more robust, we could tap into kind of new media formats, we could get smarter with our learnings and targeting and all that stuff. But primarily just for this pilot period, it is how do we just maximize our owned network? How do we use our relationships to get earned media coverage? And then, yeah, if we had to just pick one medium where we want to, scale our message on, it would probably primarily be search. But then from there, you can see, yeah, we can start layering on more distinct channels, more interesting partnerships and stuff like that over the years. But yeah, this document I know is in your hands to kind of look through it, and yeah, we'd be happy to answer any questions as well along the way. Charles, I think I'm going to pass it back to you to kind of go through even some budget considerations.
Yeah. So this next slide gives some ballpark ranges in terms of investments needed in order to scale our messages. As Josh said, year one is really about focusing in on paid search. After doing some math and calculations, we're looking at a minimum spend for year one at around $12K in order to have a consistent presence in search. And for those that don't know, obviously that's when people are exploring through Google, clean water related causes. How can the efforts here pop up to the top and be the number one kind of educational tool in order to raise that knowledge amongst people in Oregon? But we've given kind of estimates throughout the years as to how we grow this thing. With paid advertising, I guess the rule is like it's all scalable and flexible. Hopefully we can keep building this thing up year after year to a really diverse mix of touch points where we're doing everything from ads on the internet to social media campaigns to radio to print to seeing billboards around the city in different communities. That's ultimately the goal, as to how you can design this to get to a point where there's enough resource where the message can be seen and be heard loudly across the board. And then the next slide here won't dive too deeply into, but obviously with this stuff, it's not as if we out there and hope that people resonate with it. There's kind of an analytical approach to trying to figure out how we measure the success of our messages. So we break it down into those buckets of paid, owned, earned, and then more, I guess, sentimental kind of analysis on how are people really emotionally tracking with our campaign and all of that. So there's some asks that'll kind of go to the partners here on what you can track and to show that uptick, but those are steps that we'll kind of all lay out as we dive into the development of this. And so with that, Kate's going to go through what we need or what we aim to make next.
Yeah. All right. So to set the CRC and any partnering organizations up to actually make progress and move forward on this, there's a couple of things that we have to make creatively. So you can go to the next slide. That's what we'll be doing in this next phase of work once we have our strategy all finalized. There's really three big buckets. First is the campaign identity itself. We'll start with the brand hierarchy, and we'll name the campaign, we'll develop a tagline. We really need to define the role of the CRC inside of this and explain who they are. And in this part where I say brand framework, this ultimately becomes language that gets really specific about why we're doing this, who we are and who we are for, what we do and how we do it. Very critical to be super clear about that stuff at the highest level of your campaign brand. Next, we'll move into visual identity. And this is, of course, all of the fun stuff about a campaign, what it looks like, what the photography's like, what the colors are, all of that. But it's really, really critical that for the outcome of this campaign, that the visual identity be really good, because this is how we create cohesion and consistency. This is where that collective power of the coalition itself and any partnering organizations really comes together from the consumer perspective. This is how they'll know. And finally, messaging grid. This is where we pull together all of the stuff we were talking about, brand messaging, emotional, rational, and we put it against each audience segmentation and we customize it for each stage. Really critical piece of the process. And you'll see that then populate every piece of content that comes out to support the campaign. Okay, you can go to next slide, Roy. The toolkit. This is a really, really critical piece in terms of taking advantage of the grassroots organization. This is what's going to make it possible, especially in the first year, for everyone who wants to be a part of this to have what they need to take advantage of their own channels and their own communities. So we're proposing a toolkit that's designed to enable everyone to support and promote the Clean River, Clean Water campaign at no cost or very low cost. So this would include things like social share graphics and messages and guidelines for posting that you could put on your own channels. And if you wanted to boost that with spend to maximize your audience, great, but it's not a requirement. We'll be developing videos and print ads and print and digital flyer templates. There might be things like posters or stickers. I think actually there's a survey y'all are going to get after the webinar that allows you to have some input about what you would think would be useful inside this toolkit. So I hope you guys will fill that out. There'll be email templates, newsletter templates, and some guidance too around how you recruit folks to be a part of your campaign. And number 3, you can go to the next slide. It's a digital hub is what we're calling it. And yes, we're talking about a website, but I do think that calling it a digital hub is helpful, because the reason that we must have it is if we're doing digital and social advertising to build awareness, we have to drive people somewhere where they can get more information about the actions that they're going to take. This website really will serve as a hub for where we hold all of the information, where we can tell the deep campaign story, where we can talk about who the Clean Rivers Coalition is, we can feature hero stories, but we can also have a lot of information about what people can specifically do to help make sure that we have clean water. These are the 3 things that we really want to focus on in the first phase of development to support year 1. There will be creative assets that are needed throughout, but we want to be really strategic and focus on what is critical to get everybody up and running. And that is the end for us.
Thanks so much, everybody, for helping share that. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to, again, share our website, thecleanriverscoalition.com. If you sign in there, there's a sign in for a newsletter, and if you have specific comments or questions about this material, you can also ask us questions about that. In the few minutes that we have left, I guess I'd open it up to questions. I know Vanessa has some instructions for that, but if I can quickly do my quick update, I wanted to mention that I was recently notified by the EPA, the Columbia River Toxics Reductions Program that they have, had offered a grant, and we submitted a proposal, and we was notified that we were awarded this grant. And this is a $200,000 grant that we received, and there is several components there. The first one, which I think could be interesting to you all, is that we have a training that we're going to schedule for community-based social marketing. It'll be open for 120 folks, and we also have 50 slots for travel per diem and lodging. So if there are folks from out of town who want to go, who need funding, then we can offer that to folks. We also have funding to develop creative content. We're going to have a series of videos describing toxic issues kind of more broadly, and then also a series of videos featuring the pesticide behavior change things in more detail. We'll do that in English and Spanish. And then finally, we'll have a large bucket of money to spend on digital ads. And so we think this will get us through the first year and the first 2 years of this plan that we all kind of have now. And then, you know, after that, now we're gonna have to think about additional ways to get funding. But we are off to a good start. And so I wanted to share that good news with you. I'm hoping that this will kind of allow more folks to participate in this and give us input and insights. And then once we have things rolling, our plan is to create work groups so that we can get folks together to talk about issues that are important to you, how to share stories and whatnot. And of course, all this is still a little bit unknown as we kind of work together, but we'll have news for you soon. So please kind of log into the website and we'll get you some updates. Vanessa, do you have instructions for questions for folks to share through chat or?
Hi, I do. You have several questions that people have been typing throughout, so I can read them one at a time. And if you have additional ones, let's have you go ahead and type them in as we go. The first question, and you may have answered some of these to different extents, so feel free to reference back to what you said earlier. But the first question is, where does racial equity fit into these behavior change models?
This is a great question. I think this is something that we're tackling kind of as we go. We do recognize there are several audience groups that have not been part of the conversation. And so we have identified some of that. I know Brink team, I think, has thought a little bit more deeply about how we might start tackling this question. But this is another area where I think a work group will be really important, because I know that demographics change kind of depending on the region, and that there are environmental justice issues as well as kind of inclusion issues. So we're definitely going to be mindful of that as we move forward. Kate or Annie, did you have any comments on this?
I was going to say that I feel like it's kind of inherent in the consumer-based social marketing model, in that we're looking at barriers that are keeping people from changing behaviors. We're also looking at disproportionate impact and who has the burden of action. I think we talked a lot about that piece of, you know, who really bears the burden of changing behaviors, and that is where, you know, when it became apparent, you know, that homeowners from the survey are really the ones taking or using pesticides more frequently, we were, you know, in terms of income, that's where we're looking, is, you know, folks who are homeowners that have kind of the resources to make the changes, and then maybe their actions are impacting other folks disproportionately. So I think there are, you know, we're looking at barriers, we're looking at the common values, the messages, and we're looking at hyper localizing the messages too, and really kind of thinking about how are people, you know, in the imagery that we're sharing, like how are people interacting with, on the very local level, their local waterways? What are the things they do in or around their rivers? So really just trying to customize those messages as much as we can to what we know and understand about the audiences that we're working with.
Great, thank you.
This is a really exciting resource that I hope our Watershed Council can use. Is there a way to break out this data by region?
I definitely think there are. You know, we have already some regional networks. So like, say, the Lower Willamette, the Middle Willamette, or Upper Willamette, Southern Oregon. We have the Gorge area. I think those are the kind of most populated areas, of course, the Coast Range as well. But you know, we have steering committee members in each of those regions, and so again, as we move forward, I think these work groups are going to become more important, and then we'll figure out a structure for us to coordinate amongst them.
Roy, how do we apply to take that CBSM training?
Well, we'll do an announcement. I need to finalize the grant. We need to do a lot of paperwork that the EPA has. And then once we get that together, we will schedule this thing. Of course, with this COVID-19, it's become an interesting situation. We're thinking that it may happen in the wintertime, But once we do that, kind of get it nailed down, then we will put an announcement out. So be sure to sign in on that website, and we'll be able to share that information with you when we get there.
So almost a duplicate question. I'm just reading it out to amplify that it's really in an interest of folks. I'm wondering if there's data we can use that is specific to our watershed or region, as certain pesticides might be more common in different areas.
Yeah, let me turn this over to Annie. I think that this is part of the strategy already.
So the question was around just prioritizing some pesticides over others. I think the great thing is, like, a lot of the behaviors that we're focusing on are applicable across multiple pesticides. You know, if we're talking about yard care or lawn care, for example, and we're saying, you know, spot spray or don't spray at all, and use these natural alternatives. So we're not telling people specifically, like, don't use these things necessarily. We might have a list of the worst offenders, and we could customize those by region, but we're also just trying to share that positive message of, do these things. These are the approved ways of taking care of your lawn or your yard.
Yeah, to take that back too, you know, there is local data on streams. That's important. That's part of the awareness to show that science. So how do we get those stories out? This might be some videos that we create locally. And then there's also the shelf survey thing. And this is where Carrie Handley has really kind of enlightened me that, you know, there's some herbicides or pesticides that are more readily available in some areas than are not. And so if we can have the local folks kind of provide us with feedback, then we can work in work groups to kind of customize some local information and shelf surveys kind of along with the messages. I think some of the messages will probably be very similar, but again, that may be different too. You know, like in the Portland area, there may be more interest in doing certain strategies than in Medford. And so this is something that we're definitely aware of. And so we may have an umbrella message, but then some of these actions may be local.
And I love what you said, Roy, too, about the heroes. Like, how are we elevating those folks and in their stories talking about the very local issues and specific pesticides or behaviors that might be more, that might resonate more.
Hey, Roy, can you reiterate what all do the 120 slots you mentioned from the EPA grant entail? Congrats, by the way.
Oh, so Doug McKenzie Moore, who literally wrote the book on community-based social marketing, he has offered training to us at a certain cost, and he limits his trainings at 120 people. That's where that number comes from.
Okay, so this references slide 45. Brink folks, how do you recommend individual organizations balance our own branding and style guides with the CRC campaign visual identity?
Kate, you want to take this one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was just pulling up 45. So honestly, that can be tricky. I mean, we have to make some choices about colors and fonts and like just the way the thing looks. When we do that work, we will take a look at who the partnering organizations are. We'll make sure that we're not getting too close to any one of them. We're going to make some choices to try and fit as neutral as we can so that we can visually partner with anybody as well as possible. I have to be honest, it's never going to be perfect for every single kind of logo and color that's out there. But we will be thoughtful about that as we build out the brand.
Yeah. You know, I kind of thought of this earlier. I don't know if this will apply, but when I, look at my jacket, it's like a, Columbia Sportswear jacket or some kind of jacket that has a brand but then there's also a brand for like Gore-Tex on there too. And so I think there's things that can work together so that the kind of highlight the local brand, but then also highlight that this is part of a larger collective when it's appropriate to do things. And so I don't think it's exclusive. There's definitely ways and strategies that we can do to make this work. And this is another level where, input from you all at some point here, we'll figure out how to do this, but your ideas are going to be important.
Yeah, I would also add that everything that we'll make inside the toolkit, assets that you guys will be able to use, will be designed so that they can be customized for you. by you. So there'll be spaces for you to put your information and your logos and your name.
Yeah. Also point too, the Puget Sound Starts Here is a campaign that they have up in Washington. And, a lot of the ideas that we are sharing to you, have been kind of modeled after that program. If you get on the Puget Sound Starts Here's Facebook page, you'll see how they kind of do it up there. There's kind of a big umbrella campaign, and then there's all the cities and watershed councils up there that kind of use this material. So that's not exactly how we'll probably do things, but that is kind of an idea of how things could work.
Okay, how can we address these current gaps in our research, or pardon me, in our outreach? These are relevant communities in our watershed, and we cannot afford to miss the Latinx community and speakers of other languages. And they're referencing specifically slide 14.
Sorry, say that one again. I was reading some comments, so that I had been remiss in sharing the information. Say that again.
No problem. How can we address these current gaps in outreach? These are relevant communities in our watershed, and we can't afford to miss the Latinx community and speakers of other languages.
Yeah, so I'm reading from Carrie Handley, who has shared that they have their EPA funds to do Spanish language community cultural focus group, this is the first time hearing about that. So I don't know, Roy, if you can speak more to that. Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything else that Carrie had mentioned she wanted to share. And clearly there are, cultural preferences around like how we show up. And we have a long-standing practice at Brink of working in partnership with organizations, community organizations, culturally specific organizations, to really ensure that we're representing and reaching those communities in ways that are relevant to them and reflecting their values and beliefs. And also a partnership with an organization that does transcreation for us, which is really more than just translating something from one language to another. It's really thinking about how, do we need to think about a change in color? Do we need to think about a change in the imagery to ensure that that what we're putting in front of every audience, every group that we're trying to reach is culturally relevant to them?
Yeah, I will say again, so in the EPA grant, we did have funds for Spanish language videos, and that was something that we were, explicit about. We understand that there's other languages and there's other cultures, and it's, I think, partly going to be a local kind of support on this one. I think there's ideas about how to do surveys with local groups to kind of understand kind of what their needs are that we may not be able to anticipate. And it's going to be a series of, I think, discussions and work groups having local expertise and then kind of building that into what are the tools that we need for the statewide campaign as well. Yeah, this is a challenging one. And as a person of color myself, I recognize, like, whenever I see a video on the stream or river, the music doesn't really reflect my culture or the way that I perceive nature. And so I'm definitely sensitive to these needs, and hopefully that we'll have some kind of local and thoughtful discussions and products that will meet all of our needs.
Okay, referencing slide 13, do you have an example of ineffective environmentalism messaging? The messaging that were effective seem to be environmental to me. Thanks.
Oh, and I think the environmentalist language, I think this was coming primarily from folks in kind of rural Oregon, but also elsewhere. I mean, I think it's just sort of this, like, coming from it from a political angle, I think was the more environmental political standpoint of kind of having this, having more of an air of like judgment and shame and blame around it, rather than really just kind of saying, hey, we're all in this together and we can move in the right direction. I don't have a specific example of an environmental message, but I think it's more kind of just rooted in that politics piece, really trying not to be divisive on that front.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is all we have time for today.
Okay, if I could
so I
have
think
10
we're-
seconds.
Yeah.
Could I have 10 seconds? So I did want to plug the Survey Monkey that we're going to share at the end of this presentation. If you can take that and provide us some input, that would be great. And then also like to make a plug for the OSU's Solve Pest Problems, a website that they're building there. If you haven't plugged into that, this is going to be a great resource in the future. And so I just wanted to highlight that a little bit. Thanks, Melissa.
Everyone, thank you for joining us and for navigating through our technical difficulties, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation. Be sure to take a minute to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen, and thanks again for your time. Hope to see you again next time.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.